A teenage girl of 17 named Cassie entered a space filled with motorcycle enthusiasts dressed in leather and requested permission to accompany them on their journeys, which immediately triggered amusement among those present. However, the arrival of her father's motorcycle in the parking area shortly afterward silenced every joke, as the emblem on his vest revealed information that commanded everyone's attention, and Cassie was prepared to demonstrate her worthiness of inheriting this tradition. That Rusty's tavern door creaked as it swung wide, allowing an October sunbeam to penetrate through years of accumulated tobacco haze and alcohol residue. Cassie entered the establishment, her athletic shoes making squeaky sounds on the adhesive floor panels, causing all discussions to cease immediately. Being dismissed had become familiar territory for her. Standing at just over 5 feet tall at age 17, her hair secured in a functional tail and clutching a used journal to her body, she appeared to have entered the incorrect establishment the Iron Wolves riding organization had assembled for their routine weekly gathering. And witnessing this young woman, pristine, youthful, and resolute, seemed so incongruous it approached the ridiculous. A man sporting facial hair seated at the counter shouted out whether she was disoriented, triggering waves of amusement throughout the space. Cassie's pulse raced, yet she had rehearsed for this moment. She announced her search for the Iron Wolves and stated she had a proposition to present. Additional amusement followed, with someone making a reference to youth organization fundraising activities. A younger club participant named Derek, whose limbs displayed recent tattoo work, reclined in his seating and remarked this should prove entertaining. She positioned herself at the room's focal point, compelling herself to establish visual contact with them. She identified herself as a final-year student at Lincoln High School, explaining that her culminating assignment involved recording various American cultural communities, and she desired to travel alongside them, witness their activities, and chronicle their narratives. The space erupted, not with hostility, but with the amusement that stems from complete incredulity. An academic assignment. This young person desired to accompany them on their excursions as though she were a researcher examining unusual specimens. An elder female member called Maria commented, though with more gentleness than the others, that this wasn't a place for casual observation. Cassie prepared to reply when a particular sound interrupted everything else. The profound, distinctive growl of an approaching Harley-Davidson motorcycle. Not simply any vehicle. The motor possessed a unique resonance, a cadence the Iron Wolves recognized instinctively. The amusement ceased, Graham entered, and the atmosphere itself appeared to reorganize in his presence. At 58 years old, with gray strands woven through his facial hair and eyes that had witnessed experiences beyond most people's comprehension, the leather vest he displayed was weathered, with emblems attached using the attention of someone who recognized certain items held sacred significance. Across his shoulders, the Iron Wolf's symbol sat positioned above a smaller emblem reading, Founding Member, 1971. He observed Cassie, then surveyed the room. Cassie spoke softly, addressing him as her father. The revelation landed with explosive impact. Hank, the most senior member in attendance, released an extended exhalation. Derek's smug expression disappeared. Maria straightened her posture. The entire dynamic had transformed entirely, and everyone comprehended this shift. You didn't ridicule a founding member's offspring without facing repercussions. Graham moved to position himself adjacent to Cassie, and she detected the recognizable aroma of engine lubricant and hide. He didn't physically contact her or provide reassurance, yet his proximity functioned as protection nonetheless. He inquired whether she wished to explain or if he should do so. Cassie's throat constricted. This represented her opportunity. She explained that her assignment wasn't merely concerned with motorcycles or leather garments. It addressed what occurs when military personnel return home and reality no longer possesses coherence. It concerned the individuals who provided her father with motivation to continue existing when the Veterans Affairs system proved inadequate. It addressed the fraternal bond that rescued his existence. The space became still in an altered manner. Multiple members displayed discomfort through movement. This wasn't their anticipated outcome. Graham's voice carried roughness as he recounted returning from Saigon in 1971 carrying more phantom memories than actual recollections, unable to rest, unable to maintain employment, unable to comprehend how to function as a human again. He paused before continuing that these individuals provided instruction, granted him direction, a kinship unit when he couldn't identify his biological relations. Hank rose gradually, his weathered features contemplative. He observed that the young woman sought comprehension, suggesting this might not constitute the most negative outcome. Derek protested that this involved organizational matters and they didn't require some adolescent composing material about them for academic advancement. Cassie clarified it wasn't for supplementary academic credit. It represented everything. Her father never discussed the military conflict or his survival methods. Yet she detected the motorcycles on Sunday mornings and witnessed his transformation following excursions. She desired to comprehend the element that restored her father to her. Maria's features softened. Additional members nodded in gradual agreement. Even Derek couldn't formulate an immediate rebuttal. Graham regarded his offspring with an expression combining pride and apprehension, warning that it wouldn't prove simple. Extended journeys, early departures, no accommodations for anyone. Cassie acknowledged understanding. Graham specified she'd need to establish her position, that being his daughter granted entry only, with everything subsequent depending entirely on her. She confirmed her comprehension. Hank elevated his beverage and proposed granting her an opportunity, inquiring about objections. The silence provided sufficient response. Derek averted his gaze, jaw contracted, yet remained speechless. Cassie experienced something releasing within her chest cavity. She'd accomplished it. She believed the challenging portion had concluded. She possessed no awareness the expedition had merely commenced. The initial journey nearly destroyed her resolve. Cassie had envisioned something idealistic. Air flowing through her hair, unrestricted pathways, liberation. Reality involved muscular cramping, spinal discomfort, and perpetual nervousness about maintaining pace with operators who'd practiced this for multiple decades. She traveled behind her father on his Harley, maintaining a firm grip as they navigated Highway 9 through mountainous terrain, her journal secured within moisture-resistant packaging fastened to her torso. 3 hours into the journey, they halted at a rest facility. Cassie dismounted with difficulty, attempting to conceal her comprehensive physical discomfort. Maria materialized beside her, providing hydration. She commented that initial extended journeys consistently inflict physical punishment, adding that Cassie would either adjust or prove incapable. Cassie responded, perhaps excessively quickly, that she would adjust. Maria examined her through cigarette vapor, inquiring whether Graham had explained her presence and acceptance into the group. Cassie indicated negative. Maria recounted that in 1978, her spouse traveled with them before perishing on this very roadway when an intoxicated operator crossed the center division. She arrived at his commemorative journey wearing his vest, and nobody understood how to respond to her presence. She exhaled gradually, explaining she informed them of her permanent presence, that her deceased husband's inheritance belonged to her for continuation as well. 2 years elapsed before they ceased treating her as a spectral presence. Cassie inquired how minds were altered. Maria clarified nothing changed. She simply maintained consistent presence until they recognized she wasn't performing morning displays, but actually experiencing it, identical to them. Maria disposed of Ash, observing that Cassie likewise wasn't present for theatrical purposes, which she could perceive. However, Derek hadn't yet recognized this. As though conjured, Derek materialized, removing his helmet and stating they were wasting daylight hours, as certain individuals possessed actual employment obligations the following day. The journey continued. Cassie's muscles protested intensely, yet she didn't request cessation. At a dining establishment outside Millbrook, the collective dispersed across seating areas, and Cassie finally extracted her journal. This represented her purpose for coming. Hank slid into the seat opposite her position, coffee steaming between his weathered hands. He offered to provide narratives if desired. He recounted his younger sibling Jimmy, their matching motorcycle purchases in 1969, Jimmy's death 3 months subsequently when a tire failed on Interstate 40. He explained Graham located him 2 days following the funeral service, seated in his garage with alcohol and his brother's helmet. Graham didn't express much verbally, simply maintained presence. He returned the subsequent day and the next, eventually compelling him to participate in a journey, stating Jimmy wouldn't desire his motorcycle accumulating dust. Cassie inquired whether that represented his joining moment. He explained that represented when he comprehended these individuals' true nature, not insurgents or lawbreakers, simply people who grasp that mourning becomes more manageable during forward movement. Across the dining area, her father occupied seating with 3 additional veterans, their discussion hushed and earnest. Cassie captured fragments, references to unfamiliar names, locations resembling military installations. This represented a Graham aspect she'd never accessed, a communication form spoken exclusively among those who'd experienced particular shared circumstances. The serving staff delivered food, and Derek deliberately positioned himself adjacent to Cassie, invading her spatial boundaries. He inquired whether she was obtaining necessary material for her minor report. She corrected that it wasn't a report but documentation. He consumed his burger forcefully, questioning her awareness of outcomes when external parties compose material about them. They produce inaccurate portrayals, depicting them as lawbreakers or buffoons, inquiring which category she targeted. She responded neither. Her attempt involved comprehension. Derek interrupted, declaring comprehension impossible, labeling her a visitor who'd complete her assignment, receive her assessment, and disregard their existence. That Maria's voice penetrated the table space, instructing Derek that sufficed. Cassie stated acceptability, establishing visual contact with him. She acknowledged her external status accuracy, yet her father entrusted these individuals with his survival, which possessed significance for her. If she executed this incorrectly, she wasn't merely failing an academic course, but failing him as well. Therefore, absolutely, she intended to execute it correctly. Derek maintained her visual focus, then averted first. That evening, returned to the clubhouse, Cassie occupied a deteriorated couch, examining her documentation while others engaged in billiards and exchanged narratives. Her mobile device vibrated, a message from her mother inquiring about her welfare. She composed a reply, then noticed her father departing outside to receive a communication. Through the window pane, she observed his physical demeanor transform. Tension, surprise. Upon his return, Hank intercepted him, inquiring quietly whether that represented who he suspected. Graham nodded gradually, explaining Tommy had learned about the assignment and desired conversation. The name rippled through those positioned sufficiently close to detect it. Tommy. Even Cassie recognized this name, mentioned infrequently, consistently followed by silence. Maria's voice carried caution, questioning motivation after 15 years. Graham explained Tommy had been monitoring the organization's social media presence, observed Cassie's participation in their journeys, stimulated contemplation about previous times. Derek materialized from the rear space, declaring Tommy possessed no legitimate presence currently, having made his selection. Graham responded with fatigue that they all made selections, suggesting perhaps the moment had arrived to reconsider them. Cassie preserved this information, sensing she'd encountered something significant, a narrative within the narrative, an injury that hadn't experienced healing. As the evening concluded and members departed, Graham located Cassie collecting her belongings. He inquired about her endurance status. She responded sore but satisfactory. He nodded, then hesitated regarding the Tommy situation, acknowledging complexity and historical complications. She indicated her willingness to listen. He promised not that evening but soon. When she desired the complete narrative, she'd receive it, requesting patience. Cassie shouldered her container, experiencing the significance of today's acquired knowledge. This no longer solely concerned motorcycles or fraternal bonds. It addressed fractures and restoration, circumstances when kinship units separate. Somehow her assignment had transformed into the catalyst for resurfacing everything. Tommy arrived on a Thursday afternoon during the clubhouse's quiet period. Cassie occupied the space alone, converting recorded interviews to text when she detected the unfamiliar motorcycle arrive. Through the window, she observed a man approximately mid-50s dismounting. No organizational insignia, simply plain leather and cautious movements. He paused at the entrance, hand positioned on the frame as though contacting something either sacred or haunted. Then he perceived her through the glass and entered inside. He stated she must be Cassie. His voice carried identical rough warmth as other members, yet underneath flowed a nervousness current. He introduced himself as Tommy. She stood, suddenly conscious of her isolation with a stranger who somehow wasn't a stranger whatsoever. Her father had mentioned his potential communication. He responded he'd exceeded mere communication. 15 years represented extensive time for absence, so if returning, he determined actual appearance appropriate. Before Cassie could reply, Graham's truck entered the property. Her father emerged, froze upon observing Tommy's motorcycle, then approached the clubhouse with intentional steps. The entrance opened. The two men positioned themselves 3 feet separated, divided by a decade and a half of silence. Graham spoke his name. Tommy reciprocated. The atmosphere between them vibrated with everything unspoken. Finally, Graham exhaled, inquiring about coffee. Tommy agreed coffee would prove acceptable. Within 60 minutes, the clubhouse filled completely. Information traveled rapidly among the Iron Wolves. Tommy's return represented the news variety that demanded witnesses. Hank arrived initially, embracing Tommy with an intensity that constricted Cassie's throat. Maria came subsequently, more restrained yet clearly affected emotionally. Others arrived gradually until the space contained nearly 20 members spanning 3 decades of organizational history. Derek was the final arrival, and his entrance modified the temperature. He stated flatly he hadn't anticipated witnessing him again. Tommy admitted he hadn't anticipated returning. Derek questioned the motivation now. Tommy regarded Cassie, explaining he'd learned about the assignment, about Graham's offspring documenting the organization's history, which caused him to recognize their history encompasses the portions they avoid discussing, the fragments they abandoned in broken condition. Derek's jaw contracted. He stated his father died, maintaining belief in Tommy's betrayal of this organization. The space became silent. Cassie had been recording notes, yet her writing instrument stilled. This represented the injury, raw and exposed following all these years. Tommy didn't recoil. He acknowledged that Derek's father and he disagreed regarding the organization's trajectory. This held truth. He desired them to transcend weekend enthusiasts, to utilize what they'd acquired and survived to assist additional veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan. Derek's father believed that transformed them into social assistance workers rather than riders. Derek retorted he desired to alter everything they represented. Tommy corrected. He desired them to develop, to possess significance beyond themselves. Graham spoke quietly, admitting he stated nothing. When they two were destroying each other, when the organization was splitting centrally, he maintained neutrality, believing he was preserving harmony. He regarded Tommy, acknowledging his silence represented a selection that communicated his actual position. Tommy's eyes moistened. He stated Graham was his closest friend, 20 years of joint travel. He required his support, and Graham disappeared into Middle Territory. Graham acknowledged understanding. Tommy explained his departure resulted from remaining, meaning witnessing this fraternity transform into something tribal and diminished. Every journey felt like selecting allegiances. Hank cleared his throat, stating for worth consideration, they did initiate that veteran assistance program 3 years following Tommy's departure. Derek's father resisted it until his cardiac arrest, yet they accomplished it. Tommy appeared shocked. Maria added it wasn't identical without him, yet they indeed assist transitioning veterans currently, connecting them with resources, including them on journeys, providing them community. It's modest, but genuine. Cassie observed her father's features transform. Surprise, regret, something resembling relief. Graham stated they never informed him, attributing it to pride presumably, unwilling to admit Tommy's correctness. Derek stood abruptly and departed. The entrance slammed behind him. Tommy moved to follow, yet Graham caught his limb, advising time allowance. He's carrying his father's hostility because he doesn't comprehend alternative grief management methods. The assembly fragmented into smaller discussions. Cassie positioned herself beside Maria, who was removing moisture from her eyes. Maria observed this exceeded Cassie's assignment currently. She'd opened something requiring opening. Subsequently, as the sun descended and members drifted homeward, Cassie discovered her father and Tommy in the garage area, working on an aged Sportster that had sat inoperative for months. They moved in synchronized silence, transferring tools without requesting, falling into patterns acquired decades previously. She remained in the doorway, observing. Her father expressed something excessively quiet for hearing. Tommy laughed genuinely, not the careful variety from earlier. Then Graham's shoulders trembled and Cassie recognized he was weeping. Tommy gripped Graham's neck rear, and they positioned there. Two men maintaining each other's support over an engine that might never operate again. Yet that wasn't genuinely the purpose. Cassie didn't record any of this. Certain moments weren't intended for documentation. They were meant for witnessing and maintaining sacred status. Outside, she located Derek seated on his motorcycle, helmet in his hands. She stated carefully he wasn't the antagonist Derek required him to constitute. Derek's voice fractured, explaining his father spent his final year angry at Tommy, at the organization's modifications, at aging. He believed maintaining that hostility alive honored him. She suggested perhaps honoring him involved releasing it. Derek regarded her truly for the initial instance since her arrival, stating she possessed more toughness than her appearance suggested, inquiring about her awareness of this. She responded she'd been informed. He initiated his motorcycle, then paused, stating when her assignment reached completion, he desired to read it. She confirmed someone should produce the complete narrative correctly. He traveled off into the twilight, and Cassie returned to the garage where her father and Tommy were still working, still experiencing restoration, still discovering their path back to what they'd lost. The motorcycle coughed once, twice, then roared to life. The commemorative journey had been an Iron Wolves tradition for 30 years, consistently the final Sunday in May, consistently concluding at Riverside Veteran Cemetery. Yet 3 weeks following Tommy's return, Graham summoned an emergency organizational meeting and proposed something different. He suggested moving it forward, executing it the subsequent month, making it larger this year. Hank raised an eyebrow, questioning the urgency. Graham glanced at Cassie, positioned quietly in the corner with her journal, explaining that waiting for perfection meant it never occurs. They possessed Tommy's return and Cassie's documentation of their true identity. Time to honor their fallen while they're still present to execute it correctly. The vote was unanimous. Preparation consumed the subsequent 4 weeks. Cassie found herself deeply involved in unanticipated ways. Maria provided instruction about the patches, each one a narrative, an existence, an inheritance stitched into leather. They spent an afternoon in Maria's sewing space, surrounded by vests bearing names of individuals who'd never travel again. Maria identified specific patches. This one was Hank's brother Jimmy. This was Derek's father Bull. And this, she held up a patch appearing older than the others. This was the initial member they lost in 1973, a young man named Casey, merely 19 years old. Cassie photographed each one, documenting not merely the patches but Maria's hands, the needle and thread, the remembrance ritual. Tommy and Graham spent their evenings in the garage, yet now Derek joined them. The tension hadn't disappeared completely, yet something had shifted. One evening, Cassie overheard Derek inquiring of Tommy regarding the assistance program he'd envisioned, asking whether he truly believed they could make a difference. Tommy replied he knew they could. He explained that Derek's father and he disagreed on methodology, not intention. His father desired to protect what they built while Tommy desired to expand it. They were both correct and both incorrect. Derek remained quiet for an extended moment before stating his father never expressed pride in him, not once. Graham stated gently that his father didn't know how. Some men, the war took their words, left them only actions. Derek decided then he'd have to be different. The night before the journey, Maria requested Cassie come to the clubhouse alone. Upon arrival, the core members were there: Graham, Hank, Tommy, Maria, and Derek. On the table lay her father's original vest, the founding member patch prominent on the back. Maria explained they'd been discussing how what Cassie accomplished these past months transcended any school assignment. She brought them back together, helped them remember who they are. Graham picked up the vest, explaining this had been his for 54 years. Every mile, every brother, every loss, all in this leather. He extended it to Cassie, stating he wanted her to have it. Cassie's hands trembled, protesting she couldn't. He insisted she could and would, his voice firm but gentle, adding they were going to modify it first. Maria produced her sewing kit. With practiced hands, she began stitching beneath Graham's name on the patch, adding new thread in a complementary color. The needle moved steadily, creating letters that spelled out Cassie's name. Tommy stated that legacy isn't about the past staying frozen. It's about being carried forward by someone worthy. When Maria finished, she held up the vest. 2 names, 2 generations, 1 unbroken line. Cassie couldn't speak. She simply nodded, tears streaming freely. The commemorative journey began at dawn. 73 motorcycles gathered at the clubhouse, the largest turnout in Iron Wolf's history. Word had spread through veteran networks, and riders from neighboring chapters had come to pay respects. The rumble of engines was thunder given purpose. Cassie wore her father's vest, now their vest, with a pride that felt both enormous and humble. She traveled beside Graham at the front of the procession with Tommy on his other side and Hank just behind. The formation moved through town, a river of chrome and leather, drawing people to their windows and porches at the cemetery. They gathered around a memorial stone engraved with names. Hank spoke first, his voice carrying across the assembled riders, then Maria, then others who needed to say names aloud to remember friends who'd become ghosts. When they finished, Graham nodded to Cassie. She stepped forward, her notebook opened to pages worn from constant revision. She began by explaining she came to the Iron Wolves to study a subculture, but what she found was a family built from broken pieces. Men and women who learned that the opposite of war isn't peace, it's connection. She read excerpts from her interviews, Hank's story about his brother, Maria's journey from widow to warrior, her father's confession about the darkness that nearly claimed him, and the brothers who pulled him back. And then she read something new written the night before. She explained that Tommy left because he believed in growth, while Derek's father stayed because he believed in preservation. They were both trying to protect the same sacred thing. What she learned is that legacy isn't choosing between past and future. It's stitching them together with steady hands and refusing to let the thread break. Tommy and Derek stood side by side, and when Cassie finished, they clasped hands briefly. Not a resolution, but a beginning. The journey back was quieter, contemplative. At the clubhouse, members lingered over coffee and stories. Derek approached Cassie, his usual defensiveness replaced by something softer. He inquired whether she was returning this summer, stating they could use help with the assistance program, someone who knows how to tell stories properly. Cassie looked at her father, who smiled. He stated it was her choice. She touched the patch on her back, feeling the weight of her name beside his. She confirmed she'd be back. That evening, sitting at her computer, Cassie opened her project file. 20,000 words documenting the Iron Wolves, but also documenting herself, how she'd arrived as an observer and left as something else entirely. She titled it simply Brotherhood, a Legacy in Motion. Outside, she heard her father's Harley start up, joined moments later by another engine. Through the window, she saw Tommy pull up beside him. They exchanged nods, then rode off together into the evening. Two old friends reclaiming miles they'd lost. Cassie saved her work and smiled. Some journeys never really end. They just keep moving forward, carrying everyone brave enough to hold on. Cassie discovered that legacy isn't just about the past, but possessing the courage to carry it into the future, 1 mile at a time. Sometimes the greatest journeys aren't about the destination, but about honoring the road that was paved before you. What legacy would you fight to preserve? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if the story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe to embrace the journey for more stories that remind us of what truly matters.